Okay. Well, Dr. Andrew Fitz-Gibbon, thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for hosting the show, too.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
When we had tried to schedule this, I asked you if we could do it inside of your church, and you said that you hadn't done that form of worship in the last 30 or so years. Can you explain why that is?
Yes. I was, for a number of years, a traditional Baptist minister. We had a traditional English Baptist chapel. And then in the late 80s, we started to explore the idea of churches in homes. And by the time we got to the 90s, that seemed to me to be a good expression of Christianity, moving away from buildings that took an awful lot of money, and from ministers as a kind of chief executive responsible for raising money and keeping buildings and institutions in order. So we moved away from the idea of church as building to church in homes. And that developed for us over the years. So we have not been regular worshippers in a Christian church since 1994, I think. We moved to the States in 95 and immediately just began to meet in our home. And since then, the home has become our form of doing church, if that's a thing.
Yeah. It's interesting when I hear that. I come from a Roman Catholic background, and so the church was almost everything.
Yeah.
Now, when I look back in history to the very early Christians, they kind of did the same thing.
Yes.
They were doing it in like hidden caves, or sometimes the early Christians were just like in their household.
Yes.
Now, the Roman Catholic, or even other Christian denominations over here today, would kind of be, I would assume, critical of that type of approach.
It's somewhat, but not necessarily. As well as what we became involved in was called the home church movement. That wasn't really a movement, it was just given that idea. Mainstream churches with large congregations started to move into home groups because it became fairly clear that small groups of people meeting together, chatting, almost like we are now, was an important, valid form of expressing faith.
Now, to be clear, you're a Christian priest,
Yes.
right? If you could kind of summarize Christianity, or maybe give a primary proposition, very short. I know it's going to be fairly difficult.
Yeah.
What do you think that would be? I mean, in history, of course, we get, if you're not a Trinitarian, you're not a Christian. If you're not this, you're not a Christian.
Yes.
Maybe this is probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you. What is a Christian?
Okay. Well, I'm going to say there are many kinds of Christianity.
Yeah.
So rather than thinking of one monolithic institution, I think it's more interesting to think of different expressions of Christianity. And in those different expressions of Christianity, understandings of what it means to be a Christian differ. So I can really only tell you what I think.
Yeah.
And for me, being a Christian is trying to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ as far as we can understand them from the scriptures, and also being embedded in a historical tradition. Christianity has been my spiritual home since the early 1970s. And at times I get very frustrated with it. I get angry with it. I want to burn it to the ground.
Interesting. Okay.
But have remained within it because I think being part of a living tradition is important.
So you would say things like the type of Christianity, and as we said, there's many, that tries to kind of push other Christians out by saying, well, you're not Christian because X or Y. You would kind of move away from that.
Certainly.
Sounds like.
Yeah. I don't own that kind of Christianity at all. But it's quite prevalent, especially here in the United States. That doesn't work for me at all.
So you're saying that just following the teachings of this mysterious man named Jesus, that would be good enough to be a Christian.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I don't go around proclaiming I'm a Christian. I don't wear the T-shirt. And for me, it's increasingly become a much more personal, hidden thing, under the radar. And my Christian expression is to try to be as Christ-like as you can without naming it. So I rarely talk about God. I rarely talk about Christ. I never try to convert anyone. I just try and live a decent life.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about this man named Jesus,
Yes.
what do you think we can comfortably know about him, given the context we have right now?
Yeah. I mean, we can know some things. And here I rely on the scholars who have done the archaeological research and the biblical scholarship. I should say I'm not in any sense a fundamentalist, so I don't look at the Bible as the inspired word of God, which is inerrant. That doesn't make sense to me. What the scholars tell us is that the Jesus we find in the New Testament is depicted in really 4 different ways by 4 different early Christian communities. And some of it seems to be historical. Some of it is clearly mythological. Some of it is poetic and parabolic. What we can know about Jesus is pretty limited.
Yeah.
We know he's a first century Jewish man in Second Temple Judaism. We know from his teachings that he spoke about love and nonviolence and was inclusive in his practices. At times he could be harsh. I take him most of this from what we now think of as Q source, which seems to be the earliest source of oral tradition closest to what Jesus said. We know he died as effectively a criminal by the Roman Empire. And beyond that, we don't know very much at all, for certain.
So to summarize, we know that he's a first century Jew. He was some type of ethical teacher of some sort. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And perhaps that he's an apocalyptic type of preacher. Would you kind of disagree with that?
I think there is some apocalyptic there in the earliest sayings of Jesus. And in that, he was a man of his day. And first century Judaism had this theme of apocalypticism, which often occurs when people are oppressed and persecuted, trodden down.
Yeah.
And it seems Jesus picked up some of that. That's probably my least favorite part of the teachings of Jesus. Yeah.
Why would you say it's your least favorite?
I'm drawn to the pacifist Jesus.
Yeah.
The Jesus who includes women amongst his disciples. The Jesus who said, love God, love your neighbor, love your enemy. I like that Jesus.
Yeah. So when we see like in the Gospel of John, when he's, I think is it also in Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, the flipping of the tables in the temple. Would you say that that's kind of off?
If the question is, was that an historical occurrence? I think I'd need to reread the scholars because they change their minds.
Yeah, quite a bit.
They do.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of life of Jesus that's attractive to me. Was Jesus angry? Quite likely.
Yeah.
Most of us get angry. Would Jesus be capable of turning over tables? Most likely.
Yeah.
Did he do that? I have no idea. But the early communities needed to make a point about something, and certainly in the Gospel of John, the point is that Jesus is overturning the old religion,
Yeah.
that Jesus is now the key figure, and breaking away from Judaism. And John's gospel, amongst all the gospels, is actually quite anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Talks about the Jews an awful lot as the enemies of Jesus and the nascent Christianity. Yeah, and it's the least historical.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to talk to you about that. What do you think John is? Because, of course, we have the synoptics,
Yeah.
Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And John kind of seems to be in his own
Yes.
little realm, but it's much more philosophical than we see with
Yes.
the others, outside, of course, of the Sermon on the Mount, which we would probably identify as some form of philosophy. What do you think John's doing?
Well, I'm not a biblical scholar.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
I'm a philosopher ethicist. So you really need a biblical scholar here
Sure.
to tell you what John's doing.
Sure.
From my reading of others, John is producing a synthesis of Greco-Roman ideas with Christianity. So the Logos idea is very much a Greek idea, and making Christianity more palatable to the people to whom John is addressing his gospel. It certainly constructs a Jesus very different to the Jesus of the Synoptics. This Jesus speaks in a very different way, in a more esoteric, philosophical way than Jesus of the Synoptics. Strangely, John's gospel is often said amongst evangelicals, read this gospel first. This is the easiest gospel. It's actually the most obtuse gospel.
I would agree, yeah.
And if you want an easy depiction of Jesus, read the Gospel of Mark. It's short, it's to the point, it moves fast, it's got some kind of momentum to it.
The earliest as well, I believe.
Besides the Q source,
Yeah.
I think Q might be early, but Mark's is the first complete gospel. Again, you've got to ask the biblical scholars.
Yeah, I think that is the consensus, though, that Mark is, of course, like we have Q, Mark, and then like Matthew and Luke are kind of pulling from both.
Yes, and had their own sources, yeah. But John is out there on his own.
Yeah. So we're kind of in this realm now of,
Yeah.
we kind of figured out what we can somewhat know. What do you think is fair to believe about this figure?
Well, I think it's fair to believe what we have reasonable accuracy historically to believe about the figure if we're talking about the historical Jesus. But scholars have for a long time made a distinction between the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith, which seems to me still to be a reasonable way of looking at it.
Yeah.
The human Jewish Jesus who wanders around Palestine in the first century, what's reasonable to believe about that is what we can historically gather from the Gospels and from other sources. What we can believe about the Christ is a very different prospect. And by the mid to the end of the first century, the Christ is becoming a very different figure than the Jesus of history, becoming more a cosmic figure. The figure that in John's Gospel creates the world.
Yeah.
Was that Jesus of Mark? I don't think so, right? So is it reasonable to believe that? Well, that's a matter of faith, and that's a different prospect than looking historically at what's reasonable to accept.
So what is this faith, if it's something different than correct me if I'm wrong, like a reasonable approach through historical evidence? What is this faith? Is it like an act, an intellectual knowing? What is
Yes. Paul Tillich said that faith is being grasped by an ultimate concern. And it seems to me that religion generally is a human attempt to come to terms with the experiences of transcendence and angst. And Christianity, like all the other religions, developed in that way, that human beings have these two experiences, not all of the time. A lot of the time life is merely mundane, but we do have times when we seem to be part of something. Our experience takes us beyond ourselves, transcendent experiences, what Sigmund Freud called oceanic experiences. Though he had never experienced it, he says in his book, Future of an Illusion, but he recognized that most people had. But all of us experience angst, existential dread, fear, anxiety, feeling of being cut loose, not knowing where we are. And religion has provided, in all its different forms, a means of finding a framework, a kind of mental map that gives us a way of coping with life. So Jesus, historically, was clearly a very powerful, influential figure to those people that knew him. And then after his death, there's this continued hope that the Christ continues in the lives of people, and then the religion of Christianity develops out of that. Is it reasonable to be a Christian? We're back to the many different forms of Christianity. And some of them, to me, are not reasonable.
When we're looking at this distinction between faith and perhaps rationality, for lack of a better word, when we look at the gospel, we see history here, parable there, myth kind of thrown in there.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to make the distinctions? And if so, how do you think that we can make the distinction?
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
There were different kinds of criticism when the critical scholarship began in the 19th century. And they're all important in their different ways. And they all add different nuances and meanings to them. So there has to be textual criticism to try and find the best text that you can so that we get the most accurate account of the Gospels as closely to what was written. There's source criticism, trying to work out where the different parts of the Gospels, for instance, came from, what sources, oral tradition, Q, Mark, Luke, Matthew, etc. There's form criticism, the way that the Gospels were written. Is this a parable? Is this a poem? Is this a story? Is this a myth? The miracle stories, what kind of stories are they? All those kind of things. And there's canonical criticism, looking at why these particular books were included in the scriptures. And there's redaction criticism, which is why did the compilers of the stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, why did they do the editorial changes that they did? Why did they move the different stories of Jesus around in different ways? Why did they add this, which somebody else did not have? Now, all of those are important ways of looking at the text. All of that scholarship is important. It's important for us to have some kind of reasonable grounding for Christianity.
Sure.
How important are they in terms of faith? I'm not too sure, to be honest. Is the person that reads the Bible at face value and gets some kind of comfort out of it, is that as valid as the scholar who knows all these different kinds of criticism and gives their life to it? Of course it's as valid. Read something simple about Jesus that gives you some kind of comfort. In my Father's house there are many mansions. If that gives a grieving person some kind of comfort that the loved ones have gone to a mansion with God or something, good.
Yeah.
In those terms, I like William James's pragmatic view of religion, that trying to decide how many angels dance on the head of the pin is foolish. I mean, it changes the world in no way.
Yeah.
But if religion produces some change for good in the world, well, yeah, good. So if somebody simply believes something about the Bible or Jesus and it gives them some sense of meaning and purpose and helps them be a better person, excellent. If it makes you become a critical, harsh, judgmental, exclusive person, then that's clearly not for me. And I think William James would scoff at it.
So it sounds like we might not need to be a Christian to get something out of this. I mean, I'm an ex-Christian, whatever that means. And so I typically call myself an atheist because it's just easier to say one word than to explain the whole,
Sure.
I guess, proposition or definitional meaning of the term that I use. For people like me, I look at the Gospels, I look at Jesus, and I feel a pull. A pull towards this figure, this mysterious man who may have raised from the dead, maybe not, but certainly had an ethical teaching that I can that I am incredibly influenced by. Do you think that it's appropriate for atheists and spiritualists and other religious traditions to kind of look at Jesus and use him for their own pragmatic use?
Sure. Yeah. In most terms, I'm a pluralist.
Okay.
So I think there is truth in all traditions. And so I readily appropriate Taoism. I teach Tai Chi Chuan and practice it every day. I like Buddhism. I took refuge in the Buddha some years ago and in the Zen tradition. I am quite fond of paganism in the British Isles.
Interesting.
Christian. And so if I have the liberty to appropriate those other traditions, why shouldn't people appropriate the Jesus tradition? And we have some good examples of that. For instance, Thich Nhat Hanh, who Vietnamese Buddhist monk who did a lot of work looking at Christianity and his form of Buddhism and finding quite close parallels. Yeah.
Do you think that it's possible for atheists to be kind of a spiritual Christian, whatever that would look like?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the problems is what atheism means.
Of course,
what atheist is.
It's not as easy as many people think that it is.
But if we're talking about someone who does not believe in a traditional view of God as a supernatural being separate from the world, perhaps the world's creator, someone who doesn't believe in that, of course that they can be Christians. You can take on the teachings of Jesus, and you can reject some of the teachings of Jesus and find benefit in that. From my working understanding of religion, those experiences of transcendence and angst are spiritual experiences. And it's no coincidence that religious tradition has a lot of room for suffering. In Buddhism, dukkha, Christianity, the cross, and the sayings of Jesus, take up your cross and follow me, which I'm pretty sure Jesus didn't say, but was a later reflection of the Christian community under persecution. But why couldn't somebody who does not believe in that kind of supernatural being, and I have to confess, I don't myself.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a supernaturalist, but I'm a Christian, but I'm not an atheist.
Yeah, I saw Pew, the research center, put out a study. It was really interesting. It showed that like 3% of Orthodox Christians don't believe in God, and about 3% of atheists do believe in God. So it's like this really weird definitional thing. So when you hear the word God, what does that mean to you?
Right. Number one word is mystery. Right?
Sure.
God is mystery. There's a long tradition in Christianity. It's called the via negativa, which is the way of negation. And it comes through the mystical tradition. And the notion is that you cannot actually say anything positive about God. You can only say what God is not.
Yeah.
So if I take that position, I can say what I think God is not. So God is not the guy in the sky with the beard. God is not the master puppeteer who decides whether it's going to rain or shine depending on prayers that I say to God. when Jesus said God is love, that seems to me to be a bit of a clue. So if God is love, then where we find love, we find God. I've been taken pretty much with some of the ideas of John Scotus Erigena, the theologian, mystic of the early Celts, 9th century, who found the whole of nature infused by God, that God is in all. It's a view we now call panentheism.
Yeah.
And my own position, I call Christian natural panentheism. I take a starting point that looking at the whole of existence, and let's call that nature. If everything that exists is nature, then if God exists, then God too is nature. And I find it helpful to think of goodness and truth and beauty and love. Wherever we find that, then that is where we find God. God might be universal consciousness. And that Hindu notion, the Brahman, and our individual Atman, I find quite useful. That it kind of links too with notions of Jungian unconscious, that we are in some sense connected to the collective unconscious through our own unconscious. Is that connection to God? Well, that's the mystery of it, right?
Yeah.
What is God? I don't know, but I can say a few things that God is not. But wherever we find those elements of beauty, truth, goodness, loving things, I think that's where we find God.
I've heard of this. I read an article a while ago about panentheism. The argument, I don't remember the exact title of the article, but the argument was essentially that panentheism might be the best pragmatic approach that not only gives some solace, comfortability, and I guess a collectivity of humans, but also to the natural world. And it might be better for us not just spiritually, but also ecologically. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm a panentheist. For me, the road to it was through early Celtic Christianity, which was on the margins of Rome at the time. And the early Celtic Christians, in a way that Roman Christians tended to, but not to the degree of the Celts, is that they produced a synthesis of their pagan culture and Christianity. And so it was because the paganism that they were part of was very earth-centered, very, very close to nature, very affirming of animals, and the goodness and beauty of nature. That was my doorway into thinking about panentheism. It's a very different approach to what became the Augustinian view that nature is corrupt and sinful and bad, and hence the Celts were heretics.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to count myself among them.
Can you explain to people what panentheism is?
Yeah.
Or just those who don't know?
Sure. It's an idea that means God is in all things and all things are in God. It's different to pantheism, that says everything is God. It still maintains a notion of transcendence, but in my natural panentheism, it's not a supernatural transcendence. It is a transcendence within. Now, that might be splitting hairs, but for me it's an important distinction that God is not outside of nature, outside the universe, that God is a part of it. It does raise questions about creation ex nihilo, and was God outside the universe and created it? That now does not make sense to me. I have no views about creation or the beginning. I think that's outside of our understanding or experience. It just seems to me nature is what is. and what is includes this notion of immanence and transcendence, and we find God in that if we're lucky.
If we're lucky.
If
Yeah.
we're lucky.
Now, at the beginning, we were talking about like the importance of rationality, but it sounds like you're also saying rationality to a certain extent, like up to what we can know, and what we can't know, kind of leave that to mystery. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think there is mystery. We humans have a great degree of hubris, right? We think we are the measure of everything.
Yeah.
Peter Singer's notion of speciesism, certainly with regard to the other animals, we think we are, more important and special. There's always been this sense for humans as being somehow in the middle between God and the animals. And that has produced a sense that we know and can know everything. And I don't think we can. I think there will always be mystery. There'll always be ambivalence. And those ideas are very practical. I've not known anybody who will kill somebody else for an ambivalence. So I just want to sit with ambivalence and mystery and not knowing. And if somebody has an experience that is outside the realm of my experience, I'm not going to say that's not true.
Yeah.
You might have an experience that I've never had. I'm just going to say, okay, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to understand that. I don't know what interpretation to give to that. So we'll just hold it as mystery.
In I believe it's the 12th century, Peter Abelard and Bernard of Clairvaux had quite a falling out where Abelard was trying to, I think he coined the term theology, and Abelard was trying to, part of those new scholastic school at the time. He's trying to kind of do philosophy in religion, and Bernard called him a heretic, got him excommunicated. I believe that he got resolved by the time he had passed away. But it sounds like you're kind of taking the approach of Abelard, where we should be trying to reason these things, where Bernard was very much, no, leave it to faith. We should be doing the basic monastic movements, which was essentially, I guess it was hard labor, minimal amount of food, and just praying.
Yes.
So you kind of have like a good mix between the two. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. There's that notion of faith seeking understanding.
Yeah.
And understanding seeking faith. I think both understanding and faith are really important. And as a philosopher, I'm going to go on seeking, peeling away layers, pointing out fallacies, and when there are absurdities, saying, well, that's a bit absurd.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, our understanding is limited, and we can't know everything. And at that point, you pull out the mystery card, I do not know, which is fine.
Now, for people like us, philosophy is probably important in regards to religion. Do you think that everyone should be kind of pushing towards philosophy, rationalization in regards to faith, or perhaps it's, I don't want to use the word more comfortable, but I'm going to use it for lack of a better term, to kind of remain in their faith, so they don't kind of get exposed to this angst?
Sure, it's a very tricky question, and pastorally, it's a very tricky question. In my two contexts, teaching students philosophy and also being a priest, in both contexts, I've been aware at times of bringing about somebody's disillusionment.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible responsibility to have. I can recall somebody many years ago who came to some studies I was doing in a religious context, and at the end of it said, "You have destroyed my faith." Now that was, sheesh, if somebody says that to you, that's a heavy burden to bear. I think you should explore these things insofar as you are able and comfortable doing. Can everybody have this kind of conversation that we're having now? No. Would this disturb some people's faith? Yes. Would they say neither you or I are real believers? Of course. But that doesn't mean we stop doing it. And there have always been people who have had to take on the responsibility of asking the difficult questions. That's a calling I've embraced, and I think that's a calling that you're embracing. Is it easy? No. Can you become kind of inflated and prideful about it? Yes. So what you need to do is those monastic exercises and get back in touch with the earth. Yeah.
It seems like there's also this problem with the new atheism movement where they kind of only went the rationality route, and it's truth, no matter what.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, I consider myself an atheist just because it's easier to say that than to explain. But I have quite an appreciation for religion, and my followers will know I get charged a bit with being soft on Christianity, and I accept the charge. I quite like this Jesus figure, and there's a lot of history here that I think is important to work through. Now, there's no doubt that there's been some huge, a good amount of evil that has come out through religion and Christianity in general. Now, I'm hard on that type of Christianity. I really appreciate your approach. Now, when you look at Christianity today, do you think it's in a positive transformation or in a detrimental crisis?
Yeah, we're in a process of change, and we've always been in a process of change. You mentioned Bernard and Abelard. That's a process of change. In the New Testament, when St. Paul talks about the people who are opposing him, that was a point of change. It's always been in this kind of flux. The flux that we're in now, whether it's a crisis or not, it probably is we've seen a resurgence of conservative fundamentalism. And this starts in the mid-1970s. As far as I've been able to read in the sociology of religion, nobody quite knows why this change happened in the mid-70s, but it happened in Christianity, in Islam, in Buddhism, in Judaism. It seems to be a search for certainties, and it becomes very hard, harsh, exclusive. In the context of the United States, this kind of religion is having profound effect on things like school boards, members of Congress now, who see it as their religious duty to become politically involved and to change things. So we now have a fairly robust movement of Christian nationalism, ostensibly to take the United States back to its Christian roots, which we never had. We've always been secular. The first Europeans that came fled the Christian nationalism of wherever they were from, and we created this imperfect union. To make it religious now, I just think it's a nightmare. But there is a strong movement to that. So I think that's the crisis that Christianity is in the United States is again taking on the mantle that when I look at history, like the Crusades, the pogroms, the various persecutions of Anabaptists and others, those were the darker sides of Christianity, and it looks like we might be heading back to that. I hope not.
Yeah. What would a healthier Christianity look like?
Yeah. Well, for me, it would be nonviolent. It would be inclusive. It would be open. It would be loving and kind and caring. Those are all the things I kind of see in Jesus, really. And a healthy Christianity would reflect that, except for driving out people from the temple with a whip.
I have 2 questions from that.
Mm.
What do you think Jesus would say about the Christianity that is dominant today or coming up in America? And if you were to meet this figure, what would you ask or perhaps say to him?
Okay. So if I met Jesus, I'd say, do you want a cup of Earl Grey or green tea? And that would give me a clue as to where he's coming from. I don't know what Jesus would say about Christianity today. It's certainly a long, long way from what we read in the Gospels. And so I don't know whether he would say anything. Maybe throw his hands up in the air with a Jewish shrug. Who knows?
Now, when we look at Jesus as a figure, do you think that it's worth looking at him as a miracle worker, or is it good enough to look at him as a ethical philosopher? Now, I get asked this question quite a bit on my page. Can Jesus just be a philosopher? Now, I want to say yes, but when I hear the names Nietzsche, Spinoza, Schopenhauer, Beauvoir, I don't feel anything towards them. I feel a pull towards Jesus. So do you think that it's good for people to kind of narrow Jesus down from the Gospels and perhaps use him in that light to alter the type of Christianity that we see today?
Yeah. Well, I don't think Jesus was a philosopher, not in the sense that we understand it. There was no systematic body of trying to explain the universe or metaphysics. What we find is a spiritual, ethical, first-century Jewish man who is making sense of life through his interpretation of Judaism, really. Can we take the ethical parts of Jesus without the religious parts? I'm sure we can.
Yeah.
So if you say love, then that's pretty important. And one of my books in 2012, Love as a Guide to Morals, was exactly that. It was taking the notion of love and making a philosophy out of that. I think I did a good job.
I'll have to take a look at it.
Yeah.
Now, if we do end up kind of pulling Jesus out of the Gospels and maybe using some of his works as metaphorical, or perhaps just the Gospels as a whole as metaphorical, do you think that we lose parts of Christianity?
Yeah. Well, it depends how you mean metaphorical, really. If you're thinking of metaphorical merely as a form of language, speech that has no substance behind it, I think that's very thin. If you're talking about metaphor in a broader context, that metaphor is it's a bit like this, then of course the Gospels are full of metaphor.
Sure.
When Jesus calls God Father, and in our tradition we call God Father Mother or Mother Father, that's metaphor. For Paul Tillich, God is beyond God. So in whatever way we talk about God, God is always more than that. And so traditional Christian language, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is metaphor. There's the heresy for you. We have no problem saying, the Good Shepherd is metaphor, or the door of the sheepfold is metaphor. But when we say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is metaphor, there's a kind of sharp intake of breath for Christians. But anything we say about God is metaphorical.
Sure.
It's an analogy rather than a literal explanation.
Now, you'd probably be charged with a few heresies so far.
Yeah,
What we've been talking about.
Quite a few.
Let's go for another one.
Go on then.
What do you think the resurrection is? Do you think that this figure was, brutally beaten, put on the cross,
Yes,
crucified, and as the story tells us, Joseph of Arimathea throws him into the tomb, right?
yes.
Does he rise after 3 days? Or is this kind of a metaphor?
I'm going to go with metaphor.
Okay.
I think if you look at Mark's gospel, the earliest full gospel, it ends with the crucifixion.
Yep.
And I think that was likely the case. But this figure, Jesus, was so important in the lives of people that there was this continued sense of presence, of the mission, of the idea, of the teaching, of the love. It continues. And I think it developed in the later first century into, how do we explain this? Well, there is this rising from the dead. If you examine the different gospel narratives of rising from the dead, they differ vastly. There's a great many inconsistencies about it. There is one school of thought that says the Gospels were written as a kind of corrective to the writings of Paul. Paul's writings are before the Gospels. Paul gives us this picture of a cosmic Christ without any real understanding of the humanity of Jesus. Is just absent really from Paul's writings. And so the Gospels come out as a kind of a supplement, corrective. Well, actually, this Christ that you talk about was actually a Jewish guy that lived, 50 years ago. The resurrection stories, tricky. If you say, do I affirm resurrection? Yes, I do. I look at nature and I see cycles of life and death continually. Do I see the resurrection of Jesus the same? Yes, I do. That life is continually renewing, recycling, and changing. And death, for me, has no existence. Death is merely a negation of life. So death does not exist.
Interesting.
It's a negative. And the positive is life and consciousness, and life and consciousness continue. In Thich Nhat Hanh's understanding of interbeing, we are all interconnected, and when the body dies, it becomes part of something else. And it seems to me reasonable to assume that consciousness too, not merely epiphenomenal of brain, but consciousness is something that continues and is reframed, reborn. But I obviously have no proof of any of this.
Can you elaborate on that further? Because most Christians would say if, Christ didn't beat death, well, then chances are there's probably nothing afterwards. So can you kind of elaborate what you mean by what you think? I don't know if the word happens is the right word to use. What do you think happens after we die?
No idea. I've never been there. This is the major mystery, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that we cease to exist. I think maybe our ego ceases to be, but in biblical terms, the spirit returns to God that gave it. In Hindu terms, the Atman is fused again with the Brahman. I think consciousness is real. And I've read, as you've read, the materialists and the atheists that say everything about humanity is connected to the brain. And I just don't think that. I'm not sure I'm an idealist that think the brain is epiphenomenal of the mind,
Sure.
but the interconnectedness of consciousness and brain are really close, really important. But I think consciousness in some form or other continues. Now, whether it's at the Rainbow Bridge when we meet all our previously died dogs, well, that would be nice.
Of course.
Yeah, but I don't know.
That's one of, like, I think the main challenges for me as this agnostic atheist is consciousness.
Yeah.
It's a real mystery for me.
Yeah.
It seems absurd to say that there's only the material. I don't remember what philosopher said it, but basically, if we cut open our brain, we're thinking of a square. We're not going to find an actual square in there. So, what is this?
Yes.
What's the nature and the ontology of our thoughts?
Yes.
So I can't claim to be a materialist in that aspect. And that's been one of, like, my main challenges for me.
Yes.
Now, as we've discussed philosophy, what do you think of these arguments, these deductive arguments for and against the existence of God? If for the existence of God would be the ontological and cosmological, against would be divine hiddenness or evil. What do you think about trying to frame God or the lack thereof in these ways?
Yeah. I don't think any of the traditional proofs for God work. And in the via negativa, they don't work because you can't do it. It just doesn't work trying to prove the existence of God. The problem of evil, traditionally theodicy, how can we square a loving, all-powerful God with evil in the world? I just don't try. I think the world is mixed. Nature is red in tooth and claw. Nature is also very beautiful. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. How do we work all this out? No idea. What has God got to do with this? No idea. The best attempt at theodicy, in a way, I think came from Jürgen Moltmann, German theologian, who wrote this book about the suffering God. And his solution, if it's a solution, is to say that God is present in suffering love. So did God cause the earthquake or the tsunami? No. Where is God in that? Well, in panentheism, God is in the suffering of those who are suffering. And that kind of makes sense to me. It's a comforting way of thinking about it. Evil just is.
Yeah.
Period.
I made a video recently that got, I believe, 200,000 views. And I guess a quick summary would be that I think that truth in the way that we typically perceive it is not all that important and perhaps shouldn't be pursued in every circumstance. For example, I had a friend pass away a couple of years ago. And on his birthday, I texted his grandma. We were talking, and she said to me, Austin, I think that he is looking down at you smiling. As an atheist, obviously I don't think so. I hope so. Truly, I do. But a lot of the people in my comments said things like, you should have told her that you don't think so. Yeah, that was my response. My response would be, what I said to her was, I hope so. And I'm still telling the truth. What do you think the appropriate response to situations like that, where perhaps pursuing the truth isn't all that important?
The appropriate response is kindness. And I think it's always the appropriate response. And if that means avoiding telling truth, fair enough. Be kind. Seek the well-being of the other person. Cause the least amount of harm. be fair and kind.
Sounds very much like kind of be Christ-like, how I would imagine it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I usually end these talking about death. So I have to ask, we've already kind of described what you perhaps think and don't think death is. What is the best way to perceive it while we're living? Is it like this Heidegger's approach of where Dasein demands us to be toward death? Perhaps it's an Epicurean approach of, well, death is nothing. Or should we really take it in? What would be your response?
Yeah, two things. One is, in the monastic tradition, you lived as if this is your last day. Death is here. And that gives you some perspective on life. If I, and we don't know, might be run over by a car tomorrow. So in the light of that, what ought I to do today? And for me, it comes back to the kindness and the character and all those kind of things. But in terms of death itself, if death is merely a negation of life, then it has no separate existence. And why should I be afraid of that? The Christian tradition is one of hope, that there is some continuation, that life triumphs, and I'm hopeful in that. Do I think I'll meet my parents and my sister? Don't know.
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that would be the most ideal situation for all of us. Now, I usually end these by obviously thanking the person coming on.
Okay.
It sounds, I think it's only appropriate to end it with some sort of prayer.
Okay, I'll say a prayer then.
Sure.
Okay. Loving God, we're thankful for this conversation. And our prayer is that those who listen to our conversation would find something good, something hopeful, and something meaningful. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you for coming on the show.
It was a pleasure.